Isekai, a subgenre of fantasy that you can often find in anime, manga, light novels, and video games. A subgenre that's seen a surge in popularity in recent years, especially in the light novel industry, with big name titles like Sword Art Online, Re:Zero, and Konosuba, just to name a few. Now, people have a lot of different views on the Isekai subgenre. Some like it and some hate it, but because of its popularity, Isekai is very saturated on the market right now, even to the point where publishers like Kadokawa banned Isekai stories from entry in their light novel competition in 2017. Now, despite this, Isekai doesn't seem like it's gonna go away anytime soon, so instead of making a video talking about how much Isekai there is or just bash the subgenre, I instead want to take this opportunity to take you with me on a journey. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm the Anime Top Scholar, and today I want to take a brief look at the history of Isekai. If you were to ask an anime fan today if he knew what an isekai was, he would probably say something like, it's a wish fulfillment story about a weeb being transported to another world that is most common in light novels. Now that is definitely not wrong, but in order to understand how we got here, we're gonna need to go back and look at some ancient Japanese literature, and more specifically, the legend of Urashima Taro. The story follows a fisherman named Urashima Taro, who saves a turtle and in return is brought to a wondrous undersea kingdom. Later in the story, there's a twist where, after Taro spends what he believes to only be 4 or 5 days in the undersea kingdom, he returns to his village only to find himself 300 years in the future. Now, this definitely does sound similar to what you might expect from an isekai story. The only real difference between this and newer isekai is that it technically still takes place in our world, and that it's more similar to a time travel story than a modern isekai story. But with this being a very popular legend in Japan that many Japanese have grown up with, it's not a stretch to say that this story has had an effect on the creation of the isekai subgenre. Now, it's not like just Japan has stories like this. Even in the West, and particularly the British Isles, there exists some Celtic folklore that are similar to that of the legend of Urashima Taro. In particular, I'm talking about the folklore in regards to fairyland and the Celtic otherworld Tir na Nog, which was featured in the story of Oisin and Nima. That has definitely had an effect on early isekai, but more on that later. There are also some examples in English literature that are similar to isekai. I'm of course talking about stories like Alice's Adventure in Wonderland, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, Peter Pan, and The Chronicles of Narnia, all of which involve characters that are transported to a world much different to their own. Today, isekai often gets treated like it's a product of early 2000s light novels and anime, but that's not quite true, because back in the 90s we had anime like El Hazard from 1995, Magic Knight Rayearth from 1993, Fushigi Yugi from 1992, and even Digimon Adventure from 1999. Digimon is the best isekai, don't even at me. All of which are stories about a character or a group of characters that gets transported to another world. So while there weren't as many isekai stories floating around back then as there are now, there were still some that would pop up every now and then. But arguably, the first isekai anime is none of those, but instead the 1983 anime Seisenshi Dunbine, or Aura Battler Dunbine in English. This 49-episode anime, produced by Studio Sunrise and directed by Yoshiyuki Tomino, is an original series that's slightly based on Tomino's novel Rin no Tsubasa, or Wings of Rin, that was published from 1983 to 1986. Dunbine tells the story of Sho-sama, an 18-year-old guy who gets summoned to the medieval fantasy world of Byston Well. Now this sounds a lot more like the isekai that we know today. Teen gets transported to a medieval fantasy world? That does sound very familiar, doesn't it? Remember that I said that the folklore of fairyland and the Celtic otherworld Tirna Nog has definitely had an effect on early isekai? This show was exactly what I was referring to. Cause Tomino definitely was influenced by Celtic folklore when he created Wings of Rain and Dunbine, which you can see a lot in the naming he used, as well as the backgrounds in Dunbine that look a lot like medieval Europe and gives off a very mythological feel to them. Now, the Dunbine anime is not quite the same as the novel Wings of Rain, for you see, in Dunbine, Bandai decided to add robots to the story to capitalize on the market for plastic models that they could sell as well. They also made a bunch of changes to the story, and would make it so that certain events from the light novel would happen later in the series. This makes the anime a bit of a, excuse the language, clusterfuck at times, but it's a spectacle to behold, and something I would say people should check out regardless, especially if you're interested in seeing where isekai came from. Now let's fast forward. In the early 2000s we see that a lot of isekai take on more wish fulfillment type of stories and characters, and is usually very inspired by video games, and in particular JRPGs. Series like Sword Art Online with its overpowered main character that's stuck inside a video game world, trying to find a way to escape, has had a great deal of influence on modern isekai stories, and is often cited as the show that made isekai popular. How accurate that is can probably be debated, as before SAO, we also had series like the Dot Hack franchise and Zero no Tsukaima, or Familiar of Zero in English. But there's no denying SAO's popularity. Even more recently, we see that a lot of isekai are trying some new gimmicks to go with their stuck in a fantasy JRPG-like settings. Series like Yojo Senki, or Saga of Tanya the Evil in English, and Konosuba both decided to send the protagonists of their respective series to another world through dying. Though that is as far as the similarity of those two go, as Konosuba is a comedy that makes fun of a lot of JRPG and isekai tropes, while Saga of Tanya the Evil is more serious and also offers a bit more critical view of the world. Other popular modern titles that decide to toy around with the idea of death are series like Re:Zero. However, in this case, it's not being transported to another world through death, but instead constantly having your progress in this world be reset through death. Kind of like dying in a video game and being sent back to the previous checkpoint. Now, as you can see with these examples, they are all still very much inspired by video games, and that's definitely something that is very apparent in modern isekai stories. If I had to guess the reasoning behind this, I would say that it's because when people want to escape from their mundane and stressful everyday lives, they will often turn to video games, as it allows you to be sucked into a world where you can be anything you want. A world where you are the hero and have all the power. There's no hiding that isekai often wants to try to replicate this feeling in the viewer or reader, and based on the popularity of the subgenre, it seems to be doing a good job of that, at least the good ones. Personally, I would rather play a video game to experience that power fantasy, but I can appreciate the effort to replicate it in other mediums. And as much as I don't always care for isekai stories, I would be lying if I said I didn't enjoy any at all. So to sum up the video, isekai has roots in ancient Japanese literature in the form of the legend of Urashima Taro. It also has roots in Celtic folklore, and particularly the lore behind fairyland and the Celtic otherworld Tirna Nog. That, among other things, have been an inspiration for what is arguably the first isekai anime, or a Battler Dunbine. The isekai trend got some follow-up in the 90s and 2000s through certain shows like Magic Knight Rayearth, Fushigi Yugi, Dot Hack, and Familiar of Zero, before the subgenre exploded in popularity with modern isekai like Sword Art Online, Konosuba, Re:Zero, and Saga of Tanya the Evil. So as you can see, isekai has been around for a while, and I don't think it's going anywhere soon. What the future of this subgenre has in store for us, only time will tell. Personally, I'm hoping to see more of the shift back to dark fantasy that we've been seeing more of in light novels recently, whether that be isekai or not. I'm a fan of fantasy, and particularly dark fantasy stories. So even though isekai often gets a bad rap as bad or lazy fantasy, I still find myself gravitating towards at least one isekai show every season. That said, I wouldn't mind if the sheer volume of new isekai would slow down a little. Too much of something is never good. Anyways, I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe for more anime related content from the anime top scholar himself. Also, leave a comment about what your favorite isekai series is, whether it be anime, manga, light novel, game, or whatever. I would love to hear what you guys enjoy. Peace.